Welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. So lovely to see many of you in September, because as you know, we had a little bit of a break in August where we were off frolicking in the sun and having fun. So it's good to have you all back again tonight. So tonight we're very honoured to have the John Barratt joining us to talk all about his experiences at the IAG Loyalty Programme, which is part of Avios, which is part of British Airways. And I'm always a fan of case studies because I always like to hear about how things actually have got implemented rather than the theory of it. So John is quite a well-known coach out there in the industry. He's known for his work in the clean language, coaching. He is a general badge collector, and I'm sure he's going to show you all of the badges that he's collected on his journey. And also, interesting fact, John is actually my boyfriend. So I do know him very, very well. So I know you're not going to be disappointed tonight with his talk. So without further ado, John, I'm going to hand over to you. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Helen. So, yeah, as Helen said, this is the real stuff that I've been doing with this client for the last 18 months. When I say I've been doing it, I've been helping them and working through this. So this is an individual effort. The story that we've gone through as we've done. And, you know, the title, Helen hates the title. If anyone wants to give, maybe we have a competition, Helen, for a better title for the talk afterwards. But the idea is that it's a bit provocative. What do you do when you've got no agile coaches? Where do you go? How do you do things differently? And instead of just taking the status quo of what the industry is telling you should do, how do you kind of reinvent what agile means for you and your organization? So the first thing to think about, I don't normally like to share my badges, honestly. I know I've got a lot, but the reason why this is here is to show kind of all of the info that I've got, but also that I'm a less friendly trainer. I've actually got some quite heavy biases in my agile kind of thinking that when I went into this client with this new approach that I'm trying, which is really being open to what the client needs, being much more invitation based, I have to be aware of those things and move them to one side so that I can focus on what the client really wants. And you'll see this throughout. So Helen's already talked about clients. She's got a few details wrong, but it's pretty much there. So IAG is an overall company that has many airlines part of it: Aer Lingus, Vueling, Iberia, British Airways, Cargo, and IAG Loyalty is its own company with a parent company of IAG that works on the loyalty business. The interesting thing about when I joined, this was during COVID. So you can imagine all of the airlines really struggling and IAG Loyalty actually being one of the only profitable areas within the whole of IAG. It's quite an interesting time where there's actually opportunity for innovation and thinking about in new ways, and the rest of the airlines seeing the potential that IAG and Loyalty can have to the bottom line. So we just talked a little bit about the why, but where was the organization? So they'd had some good success in Agile, but it was mainly in kind of an IT type area. They'd create some products, but what that had actually done is create some silos in the rest of their organization. On top of that, there was the COVID thing going on, that need to really work at pace and deliver value to our customers. So we try and bring customer to the center of everything that we do. The approach that I talked a bit about invitation based. What does that really mean? So the Agile scoping model that I created with Caitlin Walker really focuses on what are the desired outcomes. So there's three phases. The initial scoping, which starts by speaking to a couple of senior leaders around the organization, understanding what their needs are for change, understanding those drivers and what they see the challenges are. Then there's the organizational scoping, which some of you may have referred to as discovery in the past, which is being really open and curious to what is present and where not just senior leaders, but the whole organization want to go. To get as much information as possible during that time, which then starts going into ongoing scoping where you've defined some clear outcomes of where you want to go, and therefore, how do you get there? What experiments do you need to try in order to try and meet those outcomes. Constantly focusing on the desired outcomes. So if the desired outcomes move, then you have to kind of change and redo the whole scoping model, albeit much quicker. So first thing that I've found, and actually this is a really crucial point, is when you're working with a client, in order to be ethical, you have to have an agreement in place. So I was one of the authors of the Agile Alliance Code of Ethics, and as a pattern throughout, which most reason, no one goes into a client and wants to be unethical. At least, maybe 80, 90% of the time, let's say. We assume good intent. But where that comes from is a lack of communication. So if you don't agree how you're going to share information, then you could be unethical without even knowing it. So I'll give you an example. So I'm going to run a workshop with the leadership team of this client. This was the canvas that we agreed with the senior leadership team of IAGL. If you don't agree how you're going to use that data and information at the time, and then they think that you've agreed that it's confidential and you've agreed that you're sharing it because you need that information to decide what you're going to do later, that is actually you being unethical. Because they think one thing, you think another, and you haven't made that clear. So if you take one thing away from this talk tonight, it's really thinking about how you contract and agree and make those expectations with the people that you're working with. And it doesn't matter if you're working at a whole organizational level or an individual level, really make it clear what your agreements are, especially around how you're going to interact and confidentiality. This canvas is available. If you just Google Agile Coaching Agreement Canvas, then it will come up on Google. Okay, so I talked a bit about discovery. What did that include? Well, first of all, it was really quite tiring. So we did 28 discovery meetings, spoke to over 80 staff, did some surveys at the floor plate, which is like a whole organization meetup we do, loads of time with the senior leadership team, survey to get more quantitative data. So whenever we're doing these things, we want to get qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data we get through a process called clean interviewing, where we're interviewing individuals or small groups and finding information. Quantitative data by sending surveys out that give us lots of metrics, but not at the detail that we might need in order for it to be useful as to specifically change what we're doing. And what we're doing with this information is we're looking for patterns and themes over time, and we're using that to adapt and inform our discovery. So in a 3-week phase, we'll look at what we've done at week 1, and we'll think about what piece of information we're missing, and then we'll use that to decide what we do next. Constantly reviewing, especially within your scope. So, I work at a whole organizational level. It doesn't actually matter if you're working at a lower level, then you can do it within whatever area you're in. We did a number of things. I'll share the deck after so that you can have a look at that at your own time. The output that we're looking for is some themes. So one of the things you can't do, or what I've found, is you can't do everything, right? So I did discovery, and I probably had a board at the end that had over 1,000 post-it notes on it. And you can't look at all of those 1,000 post-it notes. You have to try and group things together. You have to try and look at the root causes and then come with kind of a top 4 kind of ideas, or perhaps kind of a top 8, which you then get narrowed down by a smaller group to say, these are what we want you to focus on, John, over the next 6 months. That's what we did. So after the discovery phase, we decided that as a group, so the we for me is me as the Agile coach and the organization. So it's a partnership. We're doing this together. We share the responsibility for the outcomes that we've agreed and decided are right for IAGL. So it doesn't really matter what the outcomes are. You can look at those. The idea is that you've got to have these things. So there's one around kind of the overall culture. And I think one of the things that was really hard for us early on was how we measure these things. So when you first start with a client, so actually, I get a bit annoyed because I've been to quite a few talks where they go, oh, these are all the things that you should measure as an organization. I think, great, yeah, they're all correct. And I've never been in an organization where I've been able to get even like a 10th of those when I've started. So what can we do when we start? if we've got no information, where do we go? Well, you can have more kind of what we call sentiment type information. So you can say, okay, well, in 6 months, these are the sort of things we want people to start saying. That's something that anyone can do. You can show the difference in a survey results. That's also perhaps a start that you're going in the right direction. Those sort of things you can do from day one. Perhaps team health checks if you're working at that level, showing a difference in the health checks. But what we want to move away is from outputs to outcomes. So move away from number of agile teams launched or number of practices that team are doing to what difference is this going to make to the organization. So ways of working, higher level around culture, embedding that, clear prioritization, seamless workflow. So removing those silos that we've got, trying to get rid of those bottlenecks and challenges between teams and skilled and engaged colleagues. Okay, so then the hard work begins. You've agreed the outcomes. We've decided that that's what we want to go for. Now what? So what I think is really important when you're working in an organization is what I call drinking your own champagne. So if we're saying visualizing work is really important, then as an agile coaching community or however you're structured, you should be transparent and be showing your work and working in the way that you're expecting others to do so. And so this is just a visualization board at this point, as you can see, no real WIP limits, all of those sort of things, but we're just starting to get all of the experiments we want to try in order to meet those outcomes down on paper, and then working with your stakeholders to decide kind of which ones they think are going to add most value at any one point. Some of them are quite small and practical, some of them are perhaps much bigger. So over to the original question. Do you need agile coaches? Now, within IAGL, quite early on, we took the decision that the answer was not yet. What would you do with them if you hired them? You don't know how the organization is going to be structured. You don't know where the evolution is going to be going, because I'm not implementing a framework like SAFe or less. We're exploring as an organization where we want to go. So if you rush in and get agile coaches with a certain set of skills or competencies, then that might not be the right competencies in 6 months' time. The Agile Coaching Growth Wheel that I also helped create has a number of different areas, and no one person has got all of those skills or competencies that you may need. So being able to really understand that early on and not rushing into these things is so important. But you do need agile coaching support. So what we decided to do was create an agile coaching community. So take people who were really excited and enthusiastic around agile and the change, kind of your early adopters, bring them in as a group, give them lots of training and support and love from me, and then send them back out to help and support the rest of the organization. So what you're doing is you're taking the same kind of thinking around having an agile coach, but you're expanding it over a wider set of people who can help and support each other rather than having a centralized role. The other thing that actually did was it changes the ownership of the change. So what I've seen when you have agile coaches too soon is that they own the change. They're the ones driving it all, and they're seen as the ones that are kind of pushing the agile agenda, rather than if you share it over more people, then hopefully you get more resilience. So that's the thing that I'm really trying to drive with this new approach that I'm trying, is what happens when I leave the organization. So after I leave, have they got enough resilience to continue the change without me? And everything I do at the minute is thinking about, will this help them be more resilient in the future? Because what I've seen, and Helen's seen this as well, is we leave an organization and then before we know it, they've made all of the agile coaches redundant, or all of the agile delivery managers redundant. So that means that something wasn't quite right to either have the right profile of that role, or people to understand it, or the system around it wasn't resilient enough to understand the need or value of those individuals or that role within the organization. So what's next? So we talked already about some of the successes that we've had around here. And this is kind of, again, what we got the Agile community to do. Some of the things that we're trying to get them to do. So similar to what you'd expect from an Agile coach. So I thought I'd talk about the Agile coach, get that out of the way. We'll come back to that at the end. So now more around kind of the journey. Where did we come from? Where we're going to? So IGL's currently organized, or when I joined, was currently organized quite traditionally. So you had very departmental, how you'd expect most medium-sized organizations to be. And they had some people organized in squads and tribes, focused around product areas, lots of shared services, and the rest of the organization not really understanding what this black box, which was a squad and a tribe, were doing. As I said, how I'd like it to be. So if I have my ideal world, I think a really agile organization, a lot of the practices from the LESS framework help organizations be about as agile as they can be. And what I mean by agile is the ability to respond to customer needs quickly. So this is what I was talking about earlier around kind of, well, this is where they are. This is where I'd like them to be. But where do IGL want to be, which is more important in this new invitation-based world that I'm thinking of? So where we came to, given that we were thinking about two key areas, right? Priority and understanding what the priorities of the organization were, and seamless workflow. And we didn't want to make any drastic change in one go. So we came across a concept called flight levels. I didn't really know much about flight levels at the time. I'd been to a couple of open space sessions on it. So I knew it existed. I knew that it would be helpful and useful in the context, given what they said. I'd given them a number of suggestions and ideas and practices and patterns that other organizations were doing. And this is the one that they seemed to kind of align to and think, yeah, we'll give that a go. So flight levels have three levels, and we started at the top level. So this level 3 strategy, because that's where the real challenge was for the organization. So we left the teams as is for now, didn't really do anything there, and we implemented kind of a strategic portfolio type Kanban system. Then we started to look at coordination and how multiple teams coordinate together. And then only then did we start looking at how the teams needed to perhaps change and adapt in order to meet the other items. We really thought it was important to not interrupt the flow of the teams until we understood more around how the organization was going to work and how it needed to perhaps restructure in order to get the most out of that. So this is a view of our strategy board, a level 3 view. And as you can see, it's red on that column. That means they're over their work in progress limit at the moment. So, we're not perfect, but at least this is visible to the entire organization. So this has all of the initiatives that IGL are working on at the minute, hence why it's a bit grayed out. Some of them are quite confidential, but anyone in the organization can go in here and look what the thing they're working on and what priority it is compared to other things. There is no hiding from this system, and the leadership team, so this is the C team, walk this board every 2 weeks. We'll go through that in a while. So we have width limits. We use filters instead of swim lanes. One of the things, it's kind of quite simple, but moving from having in-person boards to using an online tool, it's like, oh, well, we'd have swim lanes for a in-person board. You haven't got a choice. But actually, online, it's like, oh, well, a filter is pretty much the same thing, like, and it's more user-friendly. Sounds really basic, but it's something that kind of hit me about a year ago. I was like, oh yeah, why would we use a swim lane? It's like filters are much more useful. Anyway, perhaps you've seen a similar thing. Work in progress limits, red's bad. Linked to strategic priorities and clear outcomes. So for any flight level aficionados out here, you'll probably be saying, oh, where are your outcomes? Because that's what you're meant to have on this board as well. Those are all linked to outcomes, which is all kind of positioned, and you can see all of that and how that views. So we have that kind of elsewhere. So this is more the initiatives that link to the outcomes, the KPIs. And there's still a little bit of work to do there as well. It's kind of constantly tweaking how we do those sort of things. And we have our explicit policies. So I think this class is a full Kanban board, Helen. I don't know, I feel under pressure at a Kanban meeting because I'm not a Kanban expert by any sense of the imagination.
Well, the good news is you are dating me, so you have got all this information at hand.
Yes, indeed. Okay, and the other key part here is that I talked about the need for data earlier and how that challenge is. So what this started to give us is some more interesting insights into how the organization is running. We use a tool called Actionable Agile, which will plug into Jira to start giving us this information. And the things that we started to look at is the delivery time, which is actually, well, it is actually the delivery time, but it's cycle time from delivery to going live. We don't measure discovery time at the minute. We can, we just, there's a little bit of complexity there that we need to get through before we can do that effectively. And if we want to, there's reasons why we leave things in discovery for a while, because we're discovering them, we're exploring them in our own pace. Whereas once it goes into delivery, that's where we've really committed to doing that work, and that's why we want to measure that. We're also really interested in arrival rate versus throughput. I'm constantly looking at kind of what's our arrival rate of new items coming in compared to how many things are we getting out, and making sure that those two are as stable as possible. We want them to be equal if we can, so that our demand is equal to our stuff that we can actually deliver. Okay. For me, the biggest success story of what this did to the organization was move the amount of initiatives that they're working on at any one time from 25 to 14 over what is kind of a 7-month period. So we went from 26 items when we started. I think I measured it from 25, and then the lowest at that point was 14. What that does to an organization is it really helps them to focus on what the most important things are at any one point. Just by visualizing the work, setting your work in progress limits, and slowly chipping away at it until you're really only working on things that are high priority and important for your organization. So how do we do this? What are the mechanisms that we have? So we have the Agile leadership team. IAGL leadership team, they look at this every 2 weeks, as we said, but most of the work is actually done by a cross-functional senior leadership team that get together every week that discover and shape the new work as it comes in. They use their own scorecard that they've put together. I gave them a few suggestions of different available scorings out there, and then they create their own based on that. They're also looking at team capacity and whether our WIP limits are right for our organization. And one of the key wins here is that they're also now responsible for investment allocation. So the annual budgeting has now gone. It's been replaced by a much more kind of agile, not quite rolling process yet, but we're getting there as we go. It's also, that board is up. We have weekly meetups where the whole organization is invited to. And again, every month or so, we walk the board as an entire organization. We also encourage it to be using their different area department team meetings so that everyone's really understands what's important for IGL at any one time. So we've done our level 3 strategy. Not so exciting because it looks very similar, our end-to-end coordination boards. So then we looked at the value streams, our strategic priorities, as we call them, and started to map out the end-to-end. So this is for non-air partners. That's the key flow for IGL. So we basically earn money in two ways. One from air partners, which are the likes of British Airways, Qatar now, Lingus, and then non-air partners such as kind of Amex, Nectar, those sort of companies. This covers all of the non-air partners element. What you will notice is that it's broken down into quite a few more columns. And that's to get that level of where that partner is on their onboarding journey. So this maps them from being a lead to start with all the way through to going live as a new partner. The next level down then is what we call flight paths. So mapping out how an initiative goes into a coordination view example, and then how many links does that then have to the different teams that are working on that initiative or that project or that product. And what this starts to do is create a lot of lines. And what we do with that information is, first of all, we get a bit scared because lines tend to be quite bad. They mean dependencies, they mean handoffs, it means lack of flow, which is against our outcomes. So then we have to look at, can we restructure, either a full restructure officially at an organizational level, or just bringing those two teams closer together or merging them together in a more informal way. So we're constantly using the data and information that we've got to look for how we can improve flow within the organization. So instead of guessing up front and doing a restructure or going for something like SAFE that says implement this framework, do the value streams, make all those decisions up front, we're doing it in a more gradual, incremental way as we see kind of value and benefits come to light. The team level, we're framework agnostic as well. So we don't dictate to any teams what agile framework they need to use. What we do is have a playbook. So within the playbook, we have a number of different areas. There's a lot more of this now. And we also have a number of processes. And this is kind of the one Confluence page to rule them all. So any new starters, anyone wants to know any information around our ways of working, they can go to the playbook, they can dig down to where they want to go, they can find out some information and some useful. So if you click on collaboration, for example, what we have is some principles, and these are principles that all of the product teams should be following. You know, there's always exceptions, but 9 out of 10 times we'd expect all of our teams to be following these principles and holding each other account for these. And then they've got a list of practices that they can choose from, like a pick and mix selection as to how to meet those principles. And then in there, there's kind of a recipe of what that principle or what that practice helps them do, how to do it. Any links we've got to kind of YouTube or our own internal kind of learning platform sit at that next level down. So again, framework agnostic, really focusing on the practices. What is consistent are the principles for all teams. What's the challenges with this approach then? So if you just have principles and practices, sometimes get teams, and this is a commercial and marketing team, so it's quite a big team. But as you can see, the data and information is a little bit scary. So their cycle time is 61 days or less to put together, for example, a marketing campaign. You have 194 items in progress, and yet their arrival rate is still higher than their throughput. So they're still adding more things in than they're doing. It's what we call a coaching opportunity. So you know, when you haven't got that level of agile coaching support and you're relying on people to do it, perhaps as part of their job, and those people get busy, then it can create challenges, as you can see here. So how do we know if we've been successful? So I'm quite proud of the work we've done in IGL. And we've talked about how we can measure things in the past. So how did we decide whether we'd been successful or not? So I believe that Agile's not the goal. So I don't have any specific Agile measures that I measure as such. It really comes down to the impact you're having in the organization. And I put that into 3 key areas. Business metrics. So how much money are we making? Efficiencies, which is really, have we saved any money from doing these things? Are we delivering more things to our customers? So it's both sides on there. Are we delighting our customers? And then colleague engagement. So how is the new ways of working helping us engage our employees? Are they happier, working more enjoyable? Are they staying with IGL for longer? And lucky for us, we're doing okay. We're going to go through that in a minute. So the first thing we did to help with that is our values, our strategy, enablers, and our measuring of success. Again, aligned to what I just said. What difference are we making? So all green things there. So that's a good start. So green means that we're on track on all of these measures or above. The only one that we're in amber on is IAG NPS, which is a measure that we're actually changing because it's not based on loyalty specifically, but the rest of the group. So we're changing that to something that makes more sense for loyalty. But all of the other areas, we are green, on track, and therefore that's a sign that Agile's helping us. Also seen a 7-point increase in the employee engagement survey results since October 21. So we had a slight dip when we first started changing to these ways of working. We have to remember that that was also during the COVID period as well. But in the last results, we're 7 points up, which is pretty cool. And we're also measuring our cycle time. But again, it's a bit soon to say what's happening there. We've still got some things that have been in from the start. And so we'll yet to see the benefits of cycle time reducing at this level, though we are delivering things to our customers quite often at the lower level. So not everything goes on our initiative board. So some of that more sentiment type stuff that we've seen. So Jira boards are great for visibility of work and assigning priorities within the team. Transparency of having a list of tasks visible to me and the wider team motivates, pressures me to work. The host muted me. All right, I'm unmuted again now. Through the task demonstrate delivery to the business. So one of the things that you've got to be really mindful of is the tools. So if you're not careful, the tools actually take over the practices and the mindset and the principles because it's the thing that people see. So people refer to the Jira board, which is the tool, rather than actually the stuff that they're doing, which is some of the Kanban practices. Now you have to decide if that matters or not for you in your context. And there's always a kind of a balance that I'm trying to do around that. So having the whole board company on board has helped tremendously. You're able to learn off other colleagues and adapt new ways of working that they have tried and tested. So again, engagement was actually a key part. So keeping that engagement and that story around what teams are trying, what's working well, what's not working well throughout, so others can learn from that, and keeping the energy and momentum going is key. I love all the Kanban boards and Jiras, including portfolio boards. It makes me my work life more organized and transparent with my line manager. It doesn't feel like a phase, it feels like it's here to stay. Again, going back to that kind of resilience that we want to try and see, that this isn't something that's going away or something that's just a transformation. It's an evolution. We've called it an evolution throughout because we're constantly evolving as an organization. And the things that we perhaps could have done better, too much time was spent talking about what Agile was, and it lacked tangible vision application in day-to-day work. So again, this is the speed you can work at. I prefer and believe that you need to go deep and narrow in one area at a time in order to get the benefits and be able to measure the impact. The challenge of that is, how do you keep the rest of the organization happy while you're doing that? You want to keep them incentivized, understanding what's going on, but you're also going to frustrate some people because they just want to get stuck in. We definitely saw that quite a bit in the kind of after the early adoption phase, so kind of 6 to 12 months in. Many areas of work are dependent on OpCo engagements. This is kind of the other operating companies, so British Airways, for example. We should share brief our ways of working with OpCos. We're starting to do that more and more now, so I'm doing a big piece in the data area. Been there today actually with the heads of data from all the areas, seeing how we can work closely and collaborating with other operating companies. And no matter what you do and how much work you do in an organization, you're still going to get some people who take a bit longer to decide that this is right for them. So it's evident to see Agile application has much greater utility in project-based work than non-project-based work, partner relations, for example. So again, spend some time. You have to remember that people are on their own journey. And one thing that we're not trying to do or haven't done with IGL is try and sell Agile to anyone. So the problem with people selling Agile is that people think you can buy it. And it's not that easy. You have to bring people on that journey in their own pace. And we have to understand that for some people, it's not going to be the right place for them anymore. And those people will leave the organization most of the time because they're just not happy, and that's fine. That's part of any change that you go through. We want to help and support them to explore that for themselves. So what are our big learnings? So the portfolio board is driving the right conversations around prioritization and capacity management. Showed you that before, and that's kind of been the big key change that's really helped IGL, is being able to visualize those priorities, what's important, making those tough decisions. Should we work on this or should we work on that? And really getting them to focus on the things that are important. Being engaged frequently with senior leadership team, we achieved high levels of engagement and positive impact on our team. So it's not really a shock there, but this is what we often call the frozen middle, and that's why it's so important. So some of you may have heard of like, oh, do you go top down or do you start bottom up? Well, actually what you need to do is go top down, bottom up, but whatever you do, don't forget about the middle. Middle management is really crucial in any organization if you want this change to stick. So trying to get them bought in as early as possible is key to the change. Evolving our own flavour of Agile to meet the unique needs of our people and our business is non-negotiable. So again, this organization has been burnt in the past by consultants going in and saying, you all need to productize your organization. You all want to do Scrum. It was really important to go back to that key kind of essence of choice and invitation and understanding and deciding what's right for you and your team. This one's about measures. So trying to get those measures in as soon as you can, getting baselines for the difference that you're trying to make. Really hard to do, but just keep going and really understand what those measures are going to be so that you can show the value and the difference that you're making to the organization as early as possible. And that then creates the momentum you need to continue the change on. I think far too much Agile coaching that we see in the industry has no accountability whatsoever to the difference you're making. And people are looking at what's the next shiniest thing or setting up the next team without thinking about the impacts that you're doing. So the one rule I have at any point is that you should be able to pause me at any point in my work that I'm doing, and I should be able to tell you, like, what's outcome is this helping do? Why am I doing this particular activity? What stance am I in based on the wheel? And what difference am I expecting this to make? That's a really good test as an Agile coach or Scrum Master or whatever the Kanban equivalent is. Again, came up earlier, but our biggest challenge, and I think I've seen this time and time again, is the rule of agility. So you can only be as agile as the least agile part of your organization. But unfortunately, even if your organization is agile and you're needing to interface with others that are perhaps still on their journey, that is going to limit you somewhat as to how reactive and response to change you can. So be aware of those limits, work with them the best you can, and slowly start to lead by example and influence those things. One of the rules we had early on with this is, well, let's get our own houses in order the best we can before trying to like throw stones in someone else's area. Lead by example, do the best we can, measure and amplify and show the impact those areas are having on your ability to delight your customers, and then work from there. You could only take the Agile evolution so far until we had the right structure in place. So there's often a debate around structure and culture, which one comes first, and I believe it's a continuous evolution. So constantly looking at how you can restructure the organization, the areas you're in order to increase agility and flow is key. Don't rush into it, get the data and information and try and make those changes gradually rather than in a big bang approach if you can. And constantly upskilling and development is key, not just in theory, but practical application. So one thing that we perhaps didn't do so well is we gave everyone a load of Agile training at the start. We did a lot of work, and then we'd do a lot of coaching and training when we started working with that team. But there was large gaps where they were on their own, where we weren't helping and involving them as both individuals and their Agile needs. So, do you need Agile coaches? That's where we started, and that's where we're going to finish. Well, we are hiring, so it's taken 18 months, but now we're in a position where we really know what we want from an Agile coach and what we need them to do in order to continue the Agile evolution. So, any questions?
Brilliant. Well, let's just give John a little round of applause before we dive into questions. Thank you very much, John. I'll kick us off. We've got a couple in the chat. We've got one from Kay. What challenges did you face engaging the wider company, getting them on board?
We didn't really have any, because in the discovery phase, you're getting everyone's opinion. So one of the rules of change is that people need to feel like their voice is heard and they're involved in the answer. So because there wasn't any enforcement, it's invitation based, the organization, although a bit maybe skeptical because they'd tried a few times before, were really excited and enthused in trying some new ways out. So I think I would say the discovery phase really helped bring that to kind of life and support most of the organization on wanting to change.
Did you just to build on that, did you find that there was different levels of enthusiasm? So like, was one area like super throwing themselves into it, but another one more reluctant?
Yeah, my rule on that is, especially early on, is try and get some momentum. So go to the areas that are really excited and interested in the change, get them on board and upfront, get the case studies from that area kind of going. And some of the people who are perhaps a bit more reluctant to start with kind of come on board as you go.
Okay. We've got another question from Garage. When we say big bang approach, does this mean focusing few teams or focusing few objectives?
I don't know what you mean by big bang. You mean where I said I go deep in one area?
I'm presuming so. That was Garage. Is he still here?
Well, there's a couple of rules around not going big bang. One is kind of focusing just on 4 key outcomes that you're working on, prioritizing your backlog of experiments, and then focusing those experiments in one place first before then evolving and rolling them out to the rest of the organization. So that's what I mean by going kind of deep in one area before going wide.
Okay. Let's go to the room. Chris, your hand's up first.
Someone need to ask to unmute. There you go, ask to unmute.
Thank you very much, John. Good to see you again. I wanted to return to the Agile coaching community and those early adopters. I'd like to understand firstly how those early adopters were identified, a little bit about that initial coaching, training, support that they had, and then you've mentioned towards the end about some knowledge gaps. It'd be good to understand what those were as well. Apologies for a layered 3-part question there.
Okay, so what was question 1 of 3? That was the how did we do it?
How did you identify those early adopters?
We actually got them to fill in an application form, and we weren't looking for agile skills in the application form. We were looking for kind of their mindset and kind of their energy around kind of agile. Okay, that was question 1. What was question 2? Oh, and also diversity. So where were they in the organization, among, and other diversity factors that may create as much different kind of ideas and thoughts as possible. What was the next one, Chris?
The second and third can be connected, I guess. Is the initial training and support they received and subsequent gaps that you noticed appeared later on in the journey?
So with that specific group, they got the Scrum Kanban training, Agile coaching, so IC Agile coaching, Agile facilitation, and then ongoing kind of mentoring from me as and when needed. Later on, the support comes more from kind of coaching Agile transitions, so more understanding how that fits into the wider view, that kind of systems thinking point of view, so more at the enterprise type coaching skills. And the next piece of training for them is Kanban 2, KMP 2, with the Helen Meek.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Was that it, Chris? That's all of them? Whew.
That'll do, yeah. That'll do for now. Thank you.
That's the Chris, Helen, by the way.
Chris.
My friend from Nationwide Days.
Well, we've got more questions for you. Let's go over to Tomo.
Oh, someone needs to unmute them.
There we go. Got it. Thank you. Very impressive. You've used all the best technologies out there with Kanban and flight levels. The one thing that surprised me was your management committees. Usually I see bottom up things on WIP limits and things. And when you assign it to some committee, that's usually assigned to me of the organization isn't as agile as it should be. But it worked for you. Could you explain that?
Well, we actually went the other way around. So we actually have more challenge with WIP limits at the team level than we do at the organizational level. I think you got to meet an organization where they are, and if they're used to lots of governance, and actually, we've stripped a lot of it away here. So if you think about all of the annual budgeting approach has all gone from having a small committee that worked through this, and it's moved from leadership, like C-level team making all of these decisions, to a cross-functional senior leadership team prioritizing those pieces. And remember, that's just your really big bits. What we have in this organization is all of our product owners have a lot of autonomy around how they prioritize at the product level. So these are only things that are kind of, we have quite strict rules about what goes on that board. It's kind of things that have that need more than one product's coordination amongst multiple departments or products, for example, is one of the criteria that it needs to have. So that's kind of how we avoid those challenges. So it's about trying to keep things at the right level and not disrupt the teams and give them as much empowerment as possible to make those things. And as you've seen, like our team approach is very much kind of like autonomous, like not even dictating what framework they must use, just aligning those principles that they've agreed. So that's how we got that balance right.
And were you inspired by the Kanban cadences at all? Do you reconcile that?
Not for a while. I did do the KMP2 course with Helen along with a colleague kind of, I don't know how long that was ago, about 4 months ago. So we started exploring a lot of that. But we'd already started doing a lot of those things. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but for example, if we talk about that TAP team that meet every week, that's actually kind of a Kanban maturity. Like if you call it, when I looked at it, it was like mapped to kind of quite a high Kanban maturity level of reviewing the board. But we kind of did that accidentally or subconsciously from Helen's input, perhaps, who knows?
Thank you.
Umar, over to you.
Hi, John. So the perspective that you've given for the implementation is from a contractor's point of view, if I'm getting it right. Somebody that the organization has hired for the purpose of change. But what about an internal coach who's trying to achieve the same thing? How can he approach that? Is there a difference or a similar set of ideas could be applied internally as well?
So I've tried to make this approach as agnostic as possible, so it doesn't matter. Now, I would say some of there's pros and cons to internal versus external coaches. Quite often, as an external kind of consultant coming in, I'm going to be, people are going to listen to me, perhaps they're going to focus. But the principles of that I talked about around scoping, it doesn't matter at what level of the organization you're looking at. The fact of going in, not jumping into solution mode too quickly, contracting with your area as to what's important to them, and then doing a number of experiments to help improve your space is kind of the principles that I'm talking about here. Now, as a general rule, I've found that Agile coaches tend to be able to coach about 2 levels above where they are in an organization, if we're realistic and it's a hierarchical organization. So we'd normally go like 2 levels up, 2 levels down. Above that, it becomes very hard to kind of interact. One of the things that we do within IAGL is the Agile coaches we're bringing in, we're expecting them to work across all of the levels. And so the level that they've been brought in at means that they actually cover all of the levels within the organization. So they're kind of in the middle, so they can go 2 up. They can also go 2 down and hit everyone in the organization. So it's quite interesting.
Brilliant. We've got a question in the chat. Mike wants to know, can you elaborate a little more on how the financial framework changed?
Yeah, so it went from, so it was led by the finance team, which was really quite exciting because I don't know if any of you have had much experience, but in the past I've really struggled for finance to kind of really embrace agile ways of working, where the finance team within IGL is really quite great. So basically the TAP team, people fill in a JIRA kind of form every quarter that kind of says how much they're asking for, and how much they're going to make from that money, if they're a product area, or what the benefits are going to be in that quarter. And then it goes through a very brief kind of review process with the TAP team, have a session with them, and then they get allocated that budget on a rolling type basis. So then the next time they have to go back and say, kind of, did you meet what you said you were going to do last time, yes or no? If no, then that product may get cut altogether, or they may get less money, or if it's doing well, then we may expand that and they may give them even more money next time. So we have an overall pot of money to allocate to all the work we're doing, and then it's dynamically split from the TAP team based not just on funding, but also capacity. So we know we've still got a bottleneck in the data area. So if your product or your initiative that you want to try and create is going to involve the data team at the minute, then you're going to struggle because we're already over capacity on that. And we know that because of the data we're getting out of our system. So there's kind of a balance on a number of things. We very rarely spend the amount of money that we can. So that tends to not be the bottleneck for us.
I've got one last question if you're good for it.
Always.
Is there anything in particular you do to encourage people to take a systems thinking approach? That's one from Natasha.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, actually, because there is still a culture of siloization that we see come out. I think the first thing is just to be the mirror. So the more outcome focused you are, and we've really put a push on being outcome based within IAGL, that really helps because you can then focus around a shared outcome. I think that where that can go wrong is if your outcomes are more at a component level so that they can't see the bigger picture. So I think how you're structured, how you organize your outcomes, perhaps using some things like OKRs that we're not at yet within IGL, that's something that's kind of, we're still looking at how to make sure that those outcomes are aligned in those areas. We're quite lucky in that we've decoupled a lot of the products so they kind of can work a lot on their own, and so they don't need so much of that. I think my whole approach using systemic coaching helps because that's constantly reiterating, looking at the systems view and noticing differences and things like that. Value stream mapping is another tool that you can use for people to be able to see the bigger picture and see how we need to map value end to end. And systems modeling as well. So that's the tool from Les that we might use to look at the impact on systems to a group. So it's using all of those different tools and techniques and just constantly being that mirror for the organization until the habit starts to change, and be really careful about what you reward. I think that what behavior are you trying to encourage and reward? If you reward and encourage individual or team behavior, then that's what you're going to get.
Thank you. And I've got one last one. So as Agile coaches, every time we go and work with a client, we learn a little something ourselves, maybe about something us as a human or how we want to work with others. What's the thing that you've learned and you're going to take away from working with IAG?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think my constant learning is around my own biases and how much we bring that to our work. So what's the impact that we're having on the system and the biases that we have, and trying to be as clean as possible in my approach. It's something that I'm constantly battling with. I think the other thing that I've learned is the power of invitation. So instead of really moving away from thou shalt do safe or thou shalt do less, to kind of what problems are you trying to solve, and which of these practices makes most sense for you. I'm pretty sold on that as my approach going forward. I think the other thing that I'm kind of convinced of now is the size of organization where the ability to change is possible. So I've worked with a lot of large organizations, and I'm pretty convinced no matter what approach I chose, the amount of resilience that the organization has to bounce back to how it was is always going to be too high. So I think, you know, small to medium-sized organizations, we've got a chance to evolve. Large organizations, I've personally given up that fight for now. So those brave enough to keep going in those large organizations, you know, my hat's off to you, but I don't think that I can do that kind of work anymore, because I just don't. I believe that that the level of change, just the ROI just isn't there for me. So you can get change for a short period, but it seems to go back very quickly. So that's not for me anymore.